While you're moving ASINs over, like, should you be trying to sort of compete with your ones on vendor, with your new ones on seller? How do you recommend going about having products, while you're in the process of moving them on vendor and on seller?
It's a balance, right? You kind of want to do the Indiana Jones, the idol swap, with the sandbag. You kind of want to do that right at the same time, right? But I do want to I just want to kind of really emphasize like what Lisa did say though, the cash flow is a big part of this because you really have to like when you do that cost analysis, when you're like saying, hey, the vendor and seller, what we were just kind of talking about with that spreadsheet before you start moving that over, start looking at what kind of cash that you need to make sure that your business is operating because like Lisa said, you're going to be getting like big checks from vendor central. They just write those big checks, and then when you make that switch over to seller central, you're not getting paid for 2 weeks. I think it's like what is it, like 10 to 14 days or whatever it is. And then when you get on seller, they're going to have reserve some of that money too. So it's going to be kind of it's going to be a shock at first. So make sure that you kind of build that into your business plan when you do make that switch. But the Pete's question here is, should we be selling on seller and vendor at the same time on the same ASINs? No, don't do that. I know you're gonna like panic and you're gonna be like, well, trying to make that swap perfectly timed can be difficult, but you don't want to be adding inventory to FBA if you have 10,000 units at vendor. You're probably never going to have that many units at vendor, but you know what I mean? Like you don't want to be like 8, 9, 10, 12 weeks of inventory into FBA when vendor still has inventory. The other, what we should talk about too is like vendor will most likely always have the buy box. Unless you undercut yourself and then you're just racing to the bottom for yourself, which is not a good strategy because you're trying to sell out of your vendor inventory. So the best thing is just try to make that plan. Try to get, plan out that 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever your inventory levels are and your velocity based on what vendor's doing, and then just schedule that out. Make an action plan with different dates and stuff when you should send this ASIN, send this ASIN, when this ASIN is going to be sold out. You can have a bit of an overlap, maybe a week, I would say. What do you think, Lisa? Like maybe a week of FBA inventory, vendor inventory? That'd be all right. You can to like and you shouldn't be fighting with your buy box. You shouldn't happen. So it wouldn't be like vendor and then seller, then vendor, then seller, right? It's not like you're gonna have that third party seller problem. But what you could do if you do get a little early, you could, close your seller listing just to make sure that your vendor listing sells out, and then you can just flip reactivate your seller listing, and then activate that inventory. But that's not necessarily gonna be needed, but it could if it does. So
No, I definitely wouldn't wanna, like you said, underprice myself. That just wouldn't be good, and I know nobody wants to compete with Amazon themselves, so definitely, yeah. So, and like you mentioned earlier, cash flow as well.
Also, be sure to, as you start to move those ASINs over, and then your vendor central ASINs start selling out, and then you zero out, like Lisa said, you're going to flip those to permanently unavailable. Amazon will stop ordering those, right? But the one element that you might forget to do is now that you need to move your ASINs and your SKUs into the campaign manager on Seller Central once they start going live. So don't forget to do that. You're going to have to rebuild all of your campaigns in Seller. You could use your vendor learnings to create some of those campaigns, but just don't forget to do that because part of your launch strategy should be to push on those a bit.
Yeah, no, I can imagine you probably just don't wanna do this on a whim. You wanna have sort of a plan in place there, maybe studying up on some Seller Central tips, looking at, like you said, like, building your own campaigns, like, maybe watching an advertising episode of a cool podcast that just came out, and getting started on that. It's my one plug for the episode. But very interesting that you mentioned, like, again, not wanting to just undercut yourself. Obviously, no one wants to do that, and I know as a seller, I wouldn't wanna compete with Amazon. So definitely, again, something to look at, like, you're really not gonna be almost selling for a little bit there. And even if you line the timing up right, where it's, like, just, like, the day after they pay you, that's when you start doing the switch, you're still gonna be out, like you said, like, a 2 or 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. So definitely something you got to look at. A lot of planning goes into this. It sounds like a lot of looking, a couple steps ahead on like, all right, can we make it to here? What's our plan for once we get started on Seller? All that kind of good stuff. So yeah, and very, very interesting discussion we're having so far on just how exactly you can make this switch. You think it would be sort of seamless if only there was a button you could say, "Oh, transfer all my products to Seller." Wouldn't that be crazy?